Welcome to Financial Minds with the Experts. I'm Jaime, your host. On this show, we're joined by financial industry experts to talk about topics, trends, and themes that credit union professionals need to know about. Today on Financial Minds Meet the Experts, we are continuing our 4-week series dedicated to security and risk. Today, we are joined by John Cuneo, our Information Security Director for Vizo Financial. John, thank you for joining me today to talk about vulnerabilities and the impact to credit union operations. But before we get started, would you mind telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Jamie. John Cuneo, obviously. I've been here at the corporate for 21 years this year. I started out in the help desk. Actually, I started out in member services and then moved to help desk. Was there for approximately 10 years and then moved into the information security department, risk department. And then the last 4 years, I've been the information security director.
Great. Actually, John, I think you and I started around the same time. I was June of, what was that? 01, I guess is when I started. You were
That's when
pretty
I
close.
started too.
Okay, I thought so.
I started in January of '01, the very last day, and then became an official employee in June of '01.
Okay,
So
great.
still remember that day. Came in with two other guys. I'm the only one that survived so far. So I don't know if that's good or bad for me.
It's good for us. So thank you for being here. So let's talk about vulnerabilities. So just before the end of 2021, there were there was a vulnerability that hackers were exploiting in order to add malicious code into Java-based logging software. What exactly was this vulnerability and how were the hackers using it?
So as a Log4j servers, they actually, like you said, they're logging software. It's an open source Java based, meaning anyone can use it at any time and adjust it for their needs. It's a lot of times it's bundled in other software, other services. So you might not even know if you have it or not. And basically, I had there's a piece of this that allowed for communication to other servers, right? And the actual vulnerability is actually called Log4Shell, but it's on the Log4j server piece. So it allows communication between servers, and there was this vulnerability or flaw built into it that allowed anyone to be able to authenticate to that server and basically see all the data and exfiltrate data and take over systems. And so you can just imagine that's probably not a good thing when you're trying to protect that. You don't want anyone else in there that's not supposed to be in there. So that's how they were taking advantage of it. One really good example when I was, you know, looking into it back in 2021 is when we go to a web page and you get that 404 error, the page cannot be found.
Mhm.
That kind of works with Log4j, and then they take that information, and they log it and they keep that kind of information. So you can imagine your IP address may be there, your browser, your computer, Windows operating system version, that could all be there. On top of it, though, this thing was so widespread. Like everyone uses it because it can be bundled into anything. Microsoft was affected. You know, Amazon was affected. Minecraft and Steam, which are gaming websites, they were using Log4j. Salesforce, Cisco reported some of their products had it. IBM. So you can just imagine some of the big boys, the little guys, everyone had it. And unfortunately, in the credit union industry, we're dependent on a lot of these vendors to keep us going, right?
Right.
So now we're dependent on them to fix the issue as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to need your help here educating me a little bit more. So, what exactly is a zero-day vulnerability? What does this mean?
Well, the short answer, it's a flaw in the software or the hardware. Um, but the reason why they use the word 0 day is because it's not known to the public. Most of the time, it's something that's been found by accident. A lot of times it's found maliciously. There is times though that what we call an ethical hacker has found it and reported it, but it's not known to the public. Sometimes The developer that created or manufactured the hardware or created the software will know about it ahead of time, and they're working on a fix, but it hasn't been released to the public yet. But there's a lot of times they do not, and they are not aware of it. Um, so it's 0 day because basically it comes out, it's being exploited, and the person that's responsible for making sure it's secure doesn't have the opportunity yet to patch it or fix it. And then once they have the opportunity and they can patch it, then it becomes a 1 day vulnerability, or just a normal vulnerability in terms. Um, Typically the company develops software or manufactures a piece of hardware with software on it, and it's either not known yet that that type of code creates this exploit. um, they deploy it, manufacture it, send it out, and then a backed actor, or even like I said, an ethical hacker finds that vulnerability. In the back actor case, they find it, they keep it, and then they try to exploit it for bad reasons. And then once it comes become known, then the developer works on trying to fix it.
Okay. So you're saying when these types of vulnerabilities are discovered by the software developers, they have to, what exactly do they have to do to fix them? And is it usually a quick fix, or does it take a while, or is it variable?
Well, that's a good question because it's a case by case situation. And Log4j case, that one was a lot more difficult for people because, like I said, it's bundled with the service or the other software, right? And then that's bundled by another vendor. So this is open source and created and developed by this group of people, these developers, and then it's bundled into the software, um, and then it's deployed out, and you know that becomes now a supply chain issue, right? So the developers now have to go back, fix it, or the vendor has to fix it on their end. So we saw with Cisco, they just did a complete upgrade to eliminate the vulnerability as quickly as possible because Cisco is very important. It's used by many companies to be their backbone of their network. So they knew the urgency behind this. But there's other vendors where it takes a little longer for them to determine where it is. Do they have that version that's vulnerable? What can we do to fix it? So the quickness of it is different. Microsoft has been known to patch theirs very quickly. Um, Others are not, just because they don't have the resources or understand exactly what they need to do. Some companies like Cisco, like I said, they did a complete upgrade. Others, they eliminated the code altogether, and others just worked on a patch and worked through the vendor. So they worked with the developers, then made sure and tested it, and then moved it on. And then we had to do the upgrade or the patch to the systems that were affected.
Well, I
It could
mean,
take weeks, or up to months,
wow,
you know. And then sometimes, then it's up to the end user to patch, right? So then it could take even more time because if you have a patch process in place, that could be another anywhere 2 to 4 weeks before you do your testing and make sure it's not going to break anything.
wow, okay. I mean, this this isn't new stuff. I mean, vulnerabilities, they always exist. So, and so what I mean is, I mean, there have been other attacks that seem to follow this same pattern where hackers are exploiting these vulnerabilities, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this has been around for a long time, probably since IT and computers have been around. We create new terms every so often, like 0 day, but it's basically the same thing. The bad actors are trying to find a way into your systems, and they're trying to beat beat the security around it in the layers we have. Um, One of the most famous ones is 2014, the Sony. I don't know if you remember the Sony movie hack,
Mhm.
where hackers came in from an unknown vulnerability, a 0 day, and they end up gathering all this management emails, and they didn't paint a very flattering picture of the management conversations. They leaked movies that were not even released yet. Um, there was some talk that this was a state backed, meaning a nation state backed attack, because one movie that hadn't been released was making fun of another nation and their political point of view. So Yeah, so that one was a big one. That cost Sony a lot of money, and a lot of embarrassment, and it created some change with them. But they also lost internal employee information like social security numbers and addresses, and so it was bigger than just the movie revenue. They also affected their employees and their staff. Another one is the DNC hack in 2016, during the election of 2016, just before the DNC convention. Someone came in with a 0 day exploited and collected, I think, something like 19,000 emails. And some of them were kind of embarrassing because it showed the inner political games that happen within political parties. And then Microsoft's been hit with 0 days. One of the more common ones was 2017 when a new Trojan named Dridex was created, and it was bundled into Microsoft Word attachments. And so then, if you received an email with a Microsoft Word and you downloaded that document, now you've been infected with that Trojan. So those are just some examples, but it's been around. I mean, that's 2014. That's almost 10 years ago now, 8 years ago, and it's been around way before that.
So, I mean, are these attacks preventable?
Well, in essence, the word 0 day means no because we don't know. It's unknown to us, right? But in some cases, they are preventable. We have seen companies like Google offer bounties. Then they're pretty good to react to what we call a bounty, which means an ethical hacker found a vulnerability within something that they offer, a system that they offer. They share it with them. There's a reporting mechanism that gets placed. And most of the time, there's an agreement that 30 days, 45 days, I'm not going to release this publicly. I'm going to give you time to fix it. But there has been times, because it could have been prevented, that companies don't react or doubt the information, and then they're like, this is too important, this is too dangerous, too of a high impact, we're going to release this information, and now those companies have to scramble. Um, but for the most part, a 0 day means it's not preventable. It's just what we can do to contain if it would happen.
Okay, very interesting. You know, I always I can't help but smile every time you say ethical hacker because for me they just don't seem like they should go together.
That's
um,
true. That's true. I always thought it was kind of funny. We used to use other terms, but ethical hackers where they kind of fell in, and it kind of stuck into the industry.
so let's kind of look at the credit unions. How can credit unions stay vigilant and be prepared to combat these attacks?
That's a that's another great question because from my perspective, one of the key points that a credit union can take away from uh, these 0 day attacks that we have seen, even if they haven't been hit, and it's a good thing that you haven't been hit, but just in case for the future, is creating a culture of security, creating this culture of having your staff understand the consequences of these attacks and what the impact that they can have not only to the credit union but also to their membership. They can provide security awareness training to their staff to help identify these type attacks. A lot of these attacks come in through phishing campaigns, which is an email posing as something that it's legitimate, but it isn't. So if they can provide security awareness training to show, and these are the key red flags that help you identify a bad email, so that they don't click on it or open an attachment or respond. That's a key part of the security culture. You can take that to another level by testing staff through what we call phishing campaign tests. And you can just send stuff that looks like bad emails and test it, see if they're going to click on it, and then educate even further if they do click on it. Um, Another key part would be a good patching program. A good patching program goes with the security culture because you're keeping up to date. Every software, every piece of software, whether it's Microsoft, Adobe, uh, your browsers. Sometimes we forget that the browsers need to be patched. Um, Most of those companies have done a really good job to make them automatic and seamless in the background, but sometimes they're not. Making sure your antivirus is up to date, your security software is up to date as well. Um, Another thing that they can do to prepare would be to make sure that people and staff members only have access to what they need, what we call the principle of least privilege. If they don't need that access, they shouldn't have that access. If they don't need administrator access or local administrator access, we can help eliminate. And I guess eliminate might not be the best word, but contain a spread of a malware because it can't go from one place to another. Whether it's file to file or system to system. There's layer security. There's a little bit more involved with that because that costs a little bit extra money. There's firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, next generation antivirus that doesn't look at just a definition that's been supplied to us through a known antivirus, but also looks at their behavior. Um, and then one thing that we have learned through Log4j, through the SolarWinds supply chain attack, is having a great relationship with your vendors, making sure you have a good point of contact that if something like this comes down the road and it hits the news media and you're being asked how are you handling this by your regulators or your auditors, you can go out to your vendors and say, are we vulnerable here? Are you vulnerable here? So you just having that good relationship and that open channel of communication between the two. And one of the other key parts that um, has been a big emphasis in the security world is an incident response program where you have a scenario based program put in place that a malware attack, here how we handle it, this is the steps. Who do you contact? Do you contain, do you turn it off, do you just pull the network cable and leave it on? You have all these steps mapped out and then you train on that. So those are some of those things that we can do as a credit union in the credit union world to be prepared for a 0 day attack.
Okay. You know, I hate to say it this way, but I mean, we live in a world where, I mean, things are happening every day. And, I constantly hear the phrase, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So
Right.
if one of these attacks were to happen to a credit union, what should their next steps be?
Containment. The first step is to identify that you're being attacked. Make sure it is an attack because sometimes um, it could just be something that's quirky going on. But most of the time, if it's an attack, then you contain it. You have to contain it as quickly as possible so it doesn't spread. And make sure during the containment, you're not affecting the investigation of to understand how to mitigate and to recover. So this is why a good program needs to be put in place to um, and practiced so that you know how to react when a specific attack type of happens. If it's a phishing attack and you click on an email and it's not a 0 day and it's just downloading adware or malware, you may handle it one way. But if it's ransomware that is trying to, you're going to handle it in a totally different way. And to have that built out and ready to go and prepared ahead of time, it allows staff to be able to react properly to the situation.
Okay. All right, great. Is there anything else we can learn from these attacks to better prepare ourselves for the next one?
Yeah, so it goes back to everything I just basically, we discussed in the previous two questions where, you know, plan, prepare, train, and practice, right? Um, plan ahead of time, try to come up with as many scenarios as possible. Make sure you have a good plan in place for not only for this type of thing, but also for natural disaster type of situations. Make sure that's all put into your incident response plan. Make sure it's well trained on, and not just management, not just IT, but everyone in the organization should be aware of what their responsibility and their role is during an incident and how they should handle it, how they should report it. Do they report it to their supervisor? Do they report it directly to the IT department and they handle it? How do they report that? What do they do on that next step afterwards? Do they just lock the machine, leave it go? Do they unplug, like I said, unplug the network cable? Um, all that should be kind of mapped out and trained on. And then I highly recommend practicing. Run through an incident response scenario. bring a scenario to a group, a diverse group within the credit union. Bring them into a room, put out a scenario, maybe have some additional um, um, incidents that happen with that, or um, some other type of factors that get put into that scenario, so that they might be slightly looking here but the actual problem's over here, so that they can think through it. We can have a good communication between the staff members to understand how everybody would react, and then you can document that and do a lesson learned. This is what we learned, this is what we need to adjust for the future test, but also for a future incident.
All right. Well, thank you, John. I mean, we I heard you say it. Plan, be prepared, training, have procedures documented, have scenarios and know what to do, in this scenario. So you can almost go to your checklist. Okay, boom, boom, boom. We're ready to, go. And then also practice it. So thank you. Really appreciate you taking the time. Any final comments for our listeners?
The only other comment I would have, and I know I talked about it a little earlier, but I really stress making sure you have a good open communication with your vendors. You're going to be, in this case, especially with Log4j and some other of these other zero-day attacks, you're going to be dependent on them to get the patch to you. So if you can keep that communication, you can have a timeline established. You can make sure they are reacting to it, and because you'll probably have a contract with them with an SLA, and they have to react to it. So you can hold them accountable for any issues as well. So can't really stress enough that having those good relationships will be very beneficial to you in the long run.
All right. Well, thank you. And I also want to say thank you to Vizo Financial's Risk Management Conference for sponsoring this security series of Financial Minds Meet the Experts. The Vizo Financial Risk Management Conference will be April 6th through the 8th at the Hotel Hershey in Hershey, PA. After 2 years, this conference is finally returning to an in person event. Very excited for that. Details about the event and the education sessions are on their website at www.vfccu.org. And I'm just going to give a quick plug based on what John said. There is a tabletop exercise that is conducted at the Risk Management Conference that does go over a scenario and how you would handle that. So it's a great tool to utilize based on some of the things that John said. And Vizo also does a tabletop exercise twice a year for credit unions at no charge through a webinar. So thanks again to everyone listening. Thank you, John, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.